Welcome back. Well, in recent times, the issue of the drying up of Lake Chad has remained a major concern, not just for the Nigerian government, but Africa as a whole, particularly countries in West Africa. There has been a dramatic decrease in the size of the lake over the past 30 years. Since 1963, the lake has shrunk to nearly a 20th of its original size, owing both to climate changes and to high demands for agricultural water. What are really the issues? What are the implications of these for countries around the Lake Chad? What are the major challenges? All these will be put into perspective as I'm being joined by the Chief Editor of Africa Health, Human and Social Development Information, Mr. Rotimi Sankore. Thank you very much for joining me, Mr. Sankore.
Thank you, Chimezia.
Well, before we go on with that conversation, let's look at this report by the World Food Programme on what exactly is happening at Lake Chad in terms of the hunger there.
Well, the hunger is just one manifestation.
Cameroon and Niger. People who normally fish and farm on fertile islands in Lake Chad had fled their homes in recent weeks following attacks by the militants who have massacred villagers and looted crops and livestock. Matu Bulumi, a 65-year-old village leader, arrived on the mainland on December 9 from Galia, a village on the islands on Lake Chad. Boko Haram insurgents, who have been fighting for 6 years to establish an Islamist state in northeast Nigeria, have stepped up attacks on neighboring countries, which joined a Nigerian offensive against the Islamist group. The displaced are now camped in makeshift shelters alongside refugees who have fled fighting in Nigeria. The settlements are strung out on barren land between the towns of Bagasola and Bole. Most of the displaced are women and children. Some of the men have been killed or have migrated for work.
Here in the Lake region of Chad, the World Food Programme is scaling up its operations as more and more displaced people are arriving, people fleeing the violence on the islands near the border with Nigeria, people who virtually left everything behind them, the food that they had harvested this year, their clothes, their tools, their fishing nets, and the vast majority of them rely almost exclusively on humanitarian aid.
The number of children under 5 and women suffering from malnutrition may rise further in the areas affected by the crisis. Well, Mr. Sankore, that's a bit of what the World Food Programme is reporting about what exactly is happening at Lake Chad now. Now, you deal more in terms of human development, and you just came up with a report that looked at the skilled and unskilled labor, in that area. Where does that fit in this case?
Okay, well, I think first we need to look at the big picture and then see how the skilled labor issues come into it. As you said, Lake Chad has shrunk to, by various estimates, between 10% and a third of its size in the 1970s of about 22,000 square kilometers. It has led to the collapse of the economy in that area, which has been based on fishing and farming for about 5 decades, led to displacement of about 5 million people. Now, because this could have been anticipated, what both the federal, state, and local governments should have been doing over all those decades should have been to step up investment in education, to develop alternate job skills. Instead, the reverse has been the case. Education investment not only hasn't kept up, it has actually decreased. So in Borno State, for instance, which is closest to the Lake Chad Basin, 83% of all men, 83% of all men have no access to education. With women, it's 63%. Just imagine that happening in any community. And then you can see that the human development is tied to the complete survival of that area. Hence, the ability of extremism to infiltrate into the situation and then recruit thousands of young men that are both unemployable and have no alternate job skills and have nowhere to go. So collapse of Lake Chad, collapse of fishing and farming, high unemployment,
which is a major
no job skills.
business there.
Yes.
Yeah, could that explain why we have this migration? You have some of these, we call them megads here, who come around perhaps to look for...
Oh yes, most definitely. When you displace 5 million people from the states in that area, they have nowhere to go. Some have gone to the bigger cities in the north like Kano, Kaduna and so forth, but you have hundreds of thousands of them have come to Abuja, to Lagos, and they are doing Merua, fetching water, doing Megad and so forth. But those are the ones that are patient, that are looking for livelihood. The really angry, naive, easily manipulated ones have been recruited by extremism.
And of course, where the insecurity problem is coming from.
Yes, and many people don't realize this is one of our biggest economic problems in the country. In many ways, the future of Nigeria economically will be determined by what happens in that area. It will probably cost about $30 billion to fix it. President Buhari appealed during the climate change talks for about 14 billion just to reflate the Lake Chad alone. Now to build schools, train teachers, create jobs through vocational training for millions of men and women cutting across that whole northeast is going to cost another 10 to 15 billion dollars. So we can see that even the budget that was announced recently does not even begin to address that problem.
All right. Now, the Lake Chad Basin Authority, has announced a 5-year investment plan that starting from 2017,
yes.
to revive the Lake Chad. And they're talking about starting from Congo River Basin, the Chari River Basin, and the Lagone River.
Yes.
Now, I'm wondering, does that mean, diverting the water from these lakes into Lake Chad?
Yes, it will mean diverting the water there, but...
But how much can that really achieve?
Well, it won't achieve what the proposed desired effect is, which is to refloat fishing and farming. But first of all, the Congolese have to agree to it, because to divert that amount of water from their rivers and from the Congo River Basin may also have the effect in their own area, which the shrinking of Lake Chad has had in the northeast. So they are going to be very, very anxious about it. But secondly, if you get all that water back, don't forget, people have been displaced. The shrinking of Lake Chad alone has displaced about 5 million. The conflict in the northeast has displaced an additional 2.1 million. 2.1 million is the same population as Qatar. They've been scattered all over the country. So if you get the water back over 5 years, starting from 2017, you still have to get all the people back to come and fish and farm, which is very, very unlikely. And if you look at the Northeast as a whole, it has the lowest skilled and unskilled labor in the whole country. In terms of skilled labor, it's on the same level with the Northwest of Nigeria, about 18%. But in terms of unskilled labor, Northeast is in single digits. And all those people have also been displaced. So the water coming back won't necessarily fix the situation. What will fix the situation is the investment in human development, which will then train and retool millions of young people. And just one last note on that. That is also the part of Nigeria that has the greatest population, the fastest population growth. So that problem is not standing still. It's getting worse every year because high total fertility rates, women there have on an average 6 or 7 children each, and men there have 2 or 3 wives. So an unemployed peasant farmer that has 2 or 3 wives and has 14 or 21 children that are not educated, and there is no unemployment, and then you just multiply over the years, you can see how that problem can easily get very worse.
Right. Well, you did mention, of course, that President Muhammadu Buhari at the recent climate change summit, of course, was asking for help and expecting about $14 billion. Well, it's not just President Buhari. Other African leaders were also soliciting for help.
Yes.
You know, now, aside from this $14 billion, what other help should we actually be looking for from the international community?
Well, beyond the international community, if you asked my opinion, I would say, first of all, that the Lake Chad Basin countries need to meet, and as well as discussing security, they should also be discussing education and human development. That's actually the biggest crisis in that place. I repeat again, you cannot have states where between 63 and 85% of men and women have no access to even primary education and expect that those countries are going to develop in any way. No industrialization, no economic growth. It's a complete recipe for disaster, which is then going to affect all of us because it has also cost billions in terms of military investment just to contain a few thousand insurgents, but it has led to disruption and destruction, which has impacted on every other person. Can I just say, the state governments have a great role to play in this. They are not really being held accountable because from what we can see, the education budgets in those areas are just as important as the security budgets. So what have they been doing with the education budget in Borno, in Yobe, and all those places for the last 10 or 15 years?
Well, I'm sure we have quite a lot to talk about this Lake Chad. But then the commission, the Lake Chad Basin Commission, how would you really assess that commission? Have they really been up to their responsibilities?
I definitely would not say so at all, because if they were up to their responsibilities, the shrinking of Lake Chad has happened over about 5 decades. And it was very easy to predict what would happen. So a problem that could have been prevented, now they are trying to start fixing it, not now, but from 2017. If you look at Borno, Borno has always been at the bottom of the internally generated revenue table in Nigeria consistently, and it's about to get worse. So if you ask me if Lake Chad Basin Authority has been able to do its job, I would say no, because a predictable problem was allowed to develop, and then they are trying to start fixing it in 2 years' time, not now.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure we would have you back here in the studio to talk more about this issue because it seemed to be a very, very big one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sankore.
Thank you very much.
Well, I've been speaking with Mr. Rotimi Sankore. He is the Chief Editor, Africa Development Information. Well, it's on that note that we draw the curtain on today's edition of the program. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Chile Well.